Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session at the United Nations World Data Forum. Our session today is on Earth observations for enhanced decision-making on connected